The Satanic Verses incident, known as qissat al-gharaniq, is the name given to the alleged occasion on which the Islamic Prophet Muhammad is blamed to have mistaken the words of satanic suggestion for divine revelation. Narratives involving these alleged verses can be read mostly in works of writers who were considered as hadith fabricators by al-Bukhari, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, al-Shafi'i unregistered trademark Abu Dawood and all authorities of 6 canonical hadith collections as well, for example, the biographies of Muhammad by al-Wāqidī, Ibn Zard. The majority of Muslim scholars however have rejected the historicity of the incident on the basis of their weak isnads and the incompatibility of the incident with the theological doctrine of isma. The first use of the expression Satanic Verses is attributed to Sir William Muir. Basic narrative. There are numerous accounts reporting the alleged incident, which differ in the construction and detail of the narrative, but they may be broadly collated to produce a basic account. The different versions of the story are all traceable to one single narrator, Muhammad ibn Ka'b, who was 2 generations removed from biographer Ibn Ishaq. In its essential form, the story reports that Muhammad longed to convert his kinsmen and neighbors of Mecca to Islam. As he was reciting Zahra and Nam, considered a revelation by the angel Gabriel, Satan tempted him to utter the following lines after verses 19 and 20. Al-Ati, Al-Uzza and Manati were 3 goddesses worshipped by the Meccans. Discerning the meaning of al-gharaniq is difficult, as it is a hapax legomenon. Commentators wrote that it meant the cranes. The Arabic word does generally mean a crane appearing in the singular as gharniq, gharniq, gharnor and gharnek, and the word has cousin forms in other words for birds, including raven, crow, and eagle. Reception in Muslim exegesis. Early Islam. The Satanic Verses incident is reported in the Tafsir and the Sirah Maghazi literature dating from the first 2 centuries of Islam, and is reported in the respective tafsir corpuses transmitted from almost every Quranic commentator of note in the first 2 centuries of the Hijra. It is generally considered a fabricated incident as the chains of narration are weak. The earliest biography of Muhammad, Ibn Ishaq, is lost, but his collection of traditions survives mainly in 2 sources, Ibn Hisham and al-Tabari. The story appears in al-Tabari, who includes Ibn Ishaq in the chain of transmission, but not in Ibn Hisham. Ibn Zard and al-Wāqidī, 2 other early biographers of Muhammad, relate the story. Scholars such as Yuri Rubin and Shahab Ahmed and Guillaume hold that the report was in Ibn Ishaq, while author T. Welch holds the report has not been presumably present in the Ibn Ishaq. Later medieval period. Due to its defective chain of narration, the tradition of the Satanic Verses never made it into any of the canonical hadith compilations. The reference and exegesis about the verses appear in early histories. In addition to appearing in Tabarā's Tafsir, it is used in the Tafsir Rs of Muqatil, Abdu ar-Razzaq and Ibn Kathir, as well as the Naskh of Abu Jur Faranayas, the Asbabi collection of Wahida, and even the late medieval Asua Tawes compilation al-Jur al-Mantha of Fil Tafsir Abil Mathar. Objections to the incident were raised as early as the 4th Islamic century, such as in the work of Anais, and continued to be raised throughout later generations by scholars such as Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, Fakhr ad-Din Razi, as well as al-Qurtubi. The most comprehensive argument presented against the factuality of the incident came in Qadi Iyad's al-Shafi'i. The incident was discounted on 2 main bases. The first was that the incident contradicted the doctrine of isma, divine protection of Muhammad from mistakes. The second was that the descriptions of the chain of transmission extant since that period are not complete and sound. Ibn Kathir points out in his commentary that the various isnads available to him by which the story was transmitted were almost all mursal, or without a companion of Muhammad in their chain. Yuri Rubin asserts that there exists a complete version of the isnad continuing to Ibn Abbas, but this only survives in a few sources. He claims that the name of Ibn Abbas was part of the original isnad, and was removed so that the incident could be deprived of its isnad and discredited. Imam Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, commenting on Surah 2252 in his Tafsir al-Kabir, stated that the people of verification declared the story as an outright fabrication, citing supporting arguments from the Cura unregistered trademark and Sunnah and Reason. He then reported that the preeminent Muhaddith ibn Khuzaymah said, "It is an invention of the heretics," when once asked about it. Al-Razi also recorded that al-Bayhaqi stated that the narration of the story was unreliable because its narrators were of questionable integrity. Those scholars who acknowledged the historicity of the incident apparently had a different method for the assessment of reports than that which has become standard Islamic methodology. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah took the position that since tafsir and Sirah Maghazi reports were commonly transmitted by incomplete isnads, these reports should not be assessed according to the completeness of the chains but rather on the basis of recurrent transmission of common meaning between reports. Al-Qurtubi dismisses all these variants in favor of the explanation that once Zahra al-Nam was safely revealed, the basic events of the incident were now permitted to occur to identify those of his followers who would accept Muhammad's explanation of their blasphemous imposture. Modern Islamic scholarship While the authors of the tafsir texts during the first 2 centuries of the Islamic era do not seem to have regarded the tradition as in any way inauspicious or unflattering to Muhammad, it seems to have been universally rejected by at least the 13th century, and most modern Muslims likewise see the tradition as problematic, in the sense that it is viewed as profoundly heretical because, by allowing for the intercession of the 3 pagan female deities, they eroded the authority and omnipotence of Allah. But they also hold damaging implications in regard to the revelation as a whole. For Muhammad, a unregistered trademark's revelation appears to have been based on his desire to soften the threat to the deities of the people. Different responses have developed concerning the account. Almost all modern Muslim scholars have rejected the story. Arguments for rejection are found in Muhammad Abdu's article Mays 3/4 Alat al-Gharaniq at Afsa al-Ayati. Muhammad Hussain Hakel's Hayat Muhammad, Sayyid Qutb's fi Zilal al-Quran, Abul al-Madud's Tfhim al-Quran, and Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani's Nasb al-Majanaq li Nasf al-Gharaniq. Hakel points out the many forms and versions of the story and their inconsistencies and argues that the contextual flow of Surah al-Nam does not allow at all the inclusion of such verses as the story claims. Hakel quotes Muhammad Abdu, who pointed out that the Arabs have nowhere described their gods in such terms as al-gharaniq. Neither in their poetry nor in their speeches or traditions do we find their gods or goddesses described in such terms. Rather, the word al-gharaniq or al-arniq was the name of a black or white water bird, sometimes given figuratively to the handsome blonde youth. Lastly, Hakel argues that the story is inconsistent with Muhammad's personal life and is completely against the spirit of the Islamic message. Ahmad ibn has said that these fake verses were shouted out by the Meccans to make it look like it was Muhammad who said it. He writes, "Some pagans and hypocrites planned secretly to recite words praising idolatry alongside the recitation of the Holy Prophet, while he was praying, in such a way that the people would think as if they were recited by him. Once when the Holy Prophet was reciting verses 19 and 20 of Nam, one of the pagans recited, Tilk al-Gharani al-Ula wa inna shifa'at jamal al-Chuja, these are the lofty, verily their intercession is sought after. As soon as this was recited, the conspirators shouted in delight to make the people believe that it was the Holy Prophet who said these words." Here, the Quran is stating the general pattern the enemies of the messengers of Allah followed when they were positively convinced that the people were paying attention to the teachings of the messengers of Allah and sincerely believing in them. They would mix their false doctrines with the original teachings so as to make the divine message a bundle of contradictions. This kind of satanic insertions are referred to in thus verse, and it is supported by Hamim, 26. It is sheer blasphemy to say that satanic forces can influence the messengers of Allah. This entire matter was a mere footnote to the back and forth of religious debate, and was rekindled only when Salman Rushdie's 1988 novel, The Satanic Verses, made headline news. The novel contains some fictionalized allusions to Islamic history, which provoked both controversy and outrage. Muslims around the world protested the book's publishing, and Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa sentencing Rushdie to death, saying that the book blasphemed Muhammad and his wives. Historicity debate. Since William Muir, the historicity of this episode has been largely accepted by Orientalists. Some Orientalists, however, argued against the historic authenticity of these verses on various grounds. William Montgomery Watt and Alfred Guillaume claim that stories of the event were true based upon the implausibility of Muslims fabricating a story so unflattering to their prophet. Muhammad must have publicly recited the Satanic Verses as part of the Quran. It is unthinkable that the story could have been invented by Muslims, or foisted upon them by non-Muslims. Trudillat, an Encyclopedia of Islam, finds what's reason to be insufficient, stating the story in its present form cannot be accepted as historical for a variety of reasons. Regarding this argument, Shahab Ahmed in the Encyclopedia of the Quran counters that the widespread acceptance of the incident by early Muslims suggests, however, that they did not view the incident as inauspicious and that they would presumably not have, on this basis at least, been adverse to inventing it. Similarly, Alfred T. Welch, in the Encyclopedia of Islam, argues that the implausibility argument alone would be insufficient to assert the tradition's authenticity. He says that the story in its present form is certainly a later, exegetical fabrication despite the fact that there could be some historical basis for the story. Welch states that the story falsely claims that the chapter 53 1-20 and the end of the chapter are a unity, and that the date for the verse 2252 is later than 5321-7, and almost certainly belongs to the Medinan period. Further, several details in the setting of the story, such as the mosque and the sword, do not belong to the Meccan phase of Muhammad's career. Welch also points out that the story was not mentioned in the Ibn Ishaq's biography of Muhammad. He says that the above analysis does not rule out the possibility of some historical kernel behind the story. One such possibility, Welch says, is that the story is of a historical telescoping nature, that a situation that was known by Muhammad's contemporaries to have lasted for a long period of time later came to be encapsulated in a story that restricts his acceptance of intercession through these goddesses to a brief period of time and places the responsibility for this departure from a strict monotheism on Satan. John Burton argued for its fictitiousness based upon a demonstration of its actual utility to certain elements of the Muslim community, namely, those legal exegetes seeking an occasion of revelation for eradicative modes of abrogation. Burton supports his theory by the fact that Tabari does not discuss the story in his exegesis of the verse 53:20, but rather in 22:52. Burton further notes that different versions of the story are all traceable to one single narrator, Muhammad ibn Ka'b, 2 generations removed from Ibn Ishaq, but not contemporary with the event. Gr. Hortin writes that the Satanic Verses incident would not serve to justify or exemplify a theory that God reveals something and later replaces it himself with another true revelation. Burton, in his rejection of the authenticity of the story, sided with Leone Caetani, who wrote that the story was to be rejected not only on the basis of isnad, but because had these hadiths even a degree of historical basis, Muhammad's reported conduct on this occasion would have given the lie to the whole of his previous prophetic activity. Maxime Rodinson finds that it may reasonably be accepted as true, because the makers of Muslim tradition would never have invented a story with such damaging implications for the revelation as a whole. He writes the following on the genesis of the verses: obviously Muhammad's unconscious had suggested to him a formula which provided a practical road to unanimity. Rodinson writes that this concession, however, diminished the threat of the Last Judgment by enabling the three goddesses to intercede for sinners and save them from eternal damnation. Further, it diminished Muhammad's own authority by giving the priests of Urza, Manat, and Alat the ability to pronounce oracles contradicting his message. Disparagement from Christians and Jews who pointed out that he was reverting to his pagan beginnings, and rebelliousness and indignation from among his own followers influenced him to go back on his revelation. However, in doing so he denounced the gods of Mecca as lesser spirits or mere names, cast off everything related to the traditional religion as the work of pagans and unbelievers, and consigned the Meccans' pious ancestors and relatives to hell. This was the final break with the Quraysh. Fred Halliday states that rather than having damaging implications, the story is a cautionary tale, the point of which is not to malign God but to point up the frailty of human beings, and that even a prophet may be misled by Shaitan, though ultimately Shaitan is unsuccessful. Since John Warnsborough's contributions to the field in the early 1970s, though, scholars have become much more attentive to the emergent nature of early Islam, and less willing to accept back-projected claims of continuity. To those who see the tradition as constantly evolving and supplying answers to questions that it itself has raised, the argument that there would be no reason to develop and transmit material which seems derogatory of the Prophet or of Islam is too simple. For one thing, ideas about what is derogatory may change over time. We know that the doctrine of the Prophet's infallibility and impeccability emerged only slowly. For another, material which we now find in the biography of the Prophet originated in various circumstances to meet various needs, and one has to understand why material exists before one can make a judgment about its basis in fact. In Rubin's recent contribution to the debate, questions of historicity are completely eschewed in favor of an examination of internal textual dynamics and what they reveal about early medieval Islam. Rubin claims to have located the genesis of many prophetic traditions and that they show an early Muslim desire to prove to other scriptures that Muhammad did indeed belong to the same exclusive predestined chain of prophets in whom the Jews and the Christians believed. He alleges that the Muslims had to establish the story of Muhammad's life on the same literary patterns as were used in the vitae of the other prophets. The incident of the Satanic Verses, according to him, conforms to the common theme of persecution followed by isolation of the prophet figure. As the story was adapted to include Quranic material, the idea of satanic temptation was claimed to have been added, heightening its inherent drama as well as incorporating additional biblical motifs. Rubin gives his attention to the narratological exigencies which may have shaped early Zahra material as opposed to the more commonly considered ones of dogma, sect, or political dynastic faction. Given the consensus that the most archaic layer of the biography is that of the stories of the qissat, that is popular storytellers, this may prove a fruitful line of inquiry. Although there could be some historical basis for the story, in its present form it is certainly a later, exegetical fabrication. Zahra Lii, 1-20 and the end of the Zahra are not a unity, as is claimed by the story. XXII, 52, is later than Lii, 21-7, and is almost certainly Medinan. And several details of the story, the mosque, the Sorda, and others not mentioned in the short summary above do not belong to the Meccan phase. Rubin also claimed that the supposed temporary control taken by Satan over Muhammad made such traditions unacceptable to early hadith compilers, which he believed to be a unique case in which a group of traditions are rejected only after being subject to Quranic models, and as a direct result of this adjustment. Related traditions. Several related traditions exist, some adapted to Quranic material, some not. One version, appearing in Tabarā's Tafsir and attributed to Abu ibn Zubayr, preserves the basic narrative but with no mention of satanic temptation. Muhammad is persecuted by the Meccans after attacking their idols, during which time a group of Muslims seeks refuge in Abyssinia. After the cessation of this first round of persecution they return home, but soon a second round begins. No compelling reason is provided for the kesra of persecution, though, unlike in the incident of the Satanic Verses, where it is the fruit of Muhammad's accommodation to Meccan polytheism. Another version attributed to Awa has only one round of fitna, which begins after Muhammad has converted the entire population of Mecca, so that the Muslims are too numerous to perform ritual prostration altogether. This somewhat parallels the Muslims and Mushrikeen prostrating themselves together after Muhammad's first, allegedly satanically infected, recitation of Zahra al-Nam, in which the efficacy of the three pagan goddesses is acknowledged. The image of Muslims and pagans prostrating themselves together in prayer in turn links the story of the Satanic Verses to very abbreviated Zahjad al-Quran traditions found in the authoritative Masain of Hadith collections, including the Sunni canonical ones of Bukhari and Tirmidhi. Rubin claims that apparently the allusion to the participation of the Mushrikeen emphasis is how overwhelming and intense the effect of this Zahra was on those attending. The traditions actually state that all cognizant creatures took part in it, humans as well as jinns. Rubin further argues that this is inherently illogical without the Satanic Verses in the recitation, given that in the accepted version of verses Q 53:19-23, the pagans' goddesses are attacked. The majority of traditions relating to prostration at the end of Zahra al-Nam solve this by either removing all mention of the mushrikeen, or else transforming the attempt of an old Meccan to participate into an act of mockery. Some traditions even describe his eventual comeuppance, saying he is later killed at the Battle of Badr. 2. Thus, according to Rubin, the story of the single polytheist who raised a handful of dirt to his forehead in a attempt of an old disabled man to participate in Muhammad's Sajud a sarcastic act of an enemy of Muhammad wishing to dishonor the Islamic prayer. And traditions which originally related the dramatic story of temptation became a sterilized anecdote providing prophetic precedent for a ritual practice. Tabari's account, an extensive account of the incident is found in al-Tabari's history, the Tariq. The Prophet was eager for the welfare of his people, desiring to win them to him by any means he could. It has been reported that he longed for a way to win them, and part of what he did to that end is what Ibn Humayd told me, from Salama, from Muhammad ibn Ishaq, from Yazid ibn Ziyad al-Madana, from Muhammad ibn Ka'b al-Quraza, when the Prophet saw his people turning away from him, and was tormented by their distancing themselves from what he had brought to them from God, he longed in himself for something to come to him from God which would draw him close to them. With his love for his people and his eagerness for them, it would gladden him if some of the hard things he had found in dealing with them could be alleviated. He pondered this in himself, longed for it, and desired it. Then God sent down the revelation. By the star when it sets. Your companion has not erred or gone astray, and does not speak from mere fancy. Q 53:1, when he reached God's words, have you seen al-Lati and al-Uzza and Manati, the third, the other? Q 53:19-20, Satan cast upon his tongue, because of what he had pondered in himself and longed to bring to his people, these are the high-flying cranes and their intercession is to be hoped for. When Quraysh heard that, they rejoiced. What he had said about their gods pleased and delighted them, and they gave ear to him. The believers trusted in their prophet with respect to what he brought them from their Lord, they did not suspect any slip, delusion or error. When he came to the prostration and finished the chapter, he prostrated and the Muslims followed their prophet in it, having faith in what he brought them and obeying his command. Those mushrikeen of Quraysh and others who were in the mosque also prostrated on account of what they had heard him say about their gods. In the whole mosque there was no believer or kafir who did not prostrate. Only al-Wāqidī bin al-Mughirah, who was an aged sheikh and could not make prostration, scooped up in his hand some of the soil from the valley of Mecca, and pressed it to his forehead. Then everybody dispersed from the mosque. Quraysh went out and were delighted by what they had heard of the way in which he spoke of their gods. They were saying, Muhammad has referred to our gods most favorably. In what he has recited he said that they are high-flying cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for. Those followers of the Prophet who had emigrated to the land of Abyssinia heard about the affair of the prostration, and it was reported to them that Quraysh had accepted Islam. Some men among them decided to return while others remained behind. Gabriel came to the Prophet and said, O Muhammad, what have you done? You have recited to the people something which I have not brought you from God, and you have spoken what he did not say to you. At that the Prophet was mightily saddened and greatly feared God. But God, of his mercy, sent him a revelation, comforting him and diminishing the magnitude of what had happened. God told him that there had never been a previous prophet or apostle who had longed just as Muhammad had longed, and desired just as Muhammad had desired, but that Satan had cast into his longing just as he had cast onto the tongue of Muhammad. But God abrogates what Satan has cast, and puts his verses in proper order. That is, you are just like other prophets and apostles. And God revealed, we never sent any apostle or prophet before you but that, when he longed, Satan cast into his longing. But God abrogates what Satan casts in, and then God puts his verses in proper order, for God is all-knowing and wise. Q 22:52, so God drive out the sadness from his prophet and gave him security against what he feared. He abrogated what Satan had cast upon his tongue in referring to their gods, They are the high-flying cranes whose intercession is accepted. Replacing those words with the words of Godwin al-Ati, al-Azza and Manati III, the other are mentioned, should you have males and females, as offspring. That, indeed, would be an unfair division. They are only names which you and your fathers have given them as far as many as are the angels in heaven, their intercession shall be of no avail unless after God has permitted it to whom he pleases and accepts. Q 53:21-26, meaning, how can the intercession of their gods be of any avail with him? When there had come from God the words which abrogated what Satan had cast onto the tongue of his prophet, Quraysh said, Muhammad has gone back on what he said about the status of our gods relative to God, changed it and brought something else, for the two phrases which Satan had cast onto the tongue of the prophet had found a place in the mouth of every polytheist. They, therefore, increased in their evil and in their oppression of everyone among them who had accepted Islam and followed the prophet. The band of the prophet's followers who had left the land of Abyssinia on account of the report that the people of Mecca had accepted Islam when they prostrated together with the prophet drew near. But when they approached Mecca they heard that the talk about the acceptance of Islam by the people of Mecca was wrong. Therefore, they only entered Mecca in secret or after having obtained a promise of protection. Among those of them who came to Mecca at the time and remained there until emigrating to Medina and taking part in the Battle of Badr alongside Muhammad there was, from the family of Abd Shams b. Abd Mana Fb. Qusayri, Uthma Nb. Afa N together with his wife Uqayya the daughter of the Prophet. Abu Hudhayfa b. Utbah with his wife Shal bint Su'il, and another group with them, numbering together 33 men. However, in the introduction of his book he states, "Let him who examines this book of mine know that I have relied, as regards everything I mention therein which I stipulate to be described by me, solely upon what has been transmitted to me by way of reports which I cite therein and traditions which I ascribe to their narrators, to the exclusion of what may be apprehended by rational argument or deduced by the human mind, except in very few cases. This is because knowledge of the reports of men of the past and of contemporaneous views of men of the present do not reach the one who has not witnessed them nor lived in their times except through the accounts of reporters and the transmission of transmitters, to the exclusion of rational deduction and mental inference. Hence, if I mention in this book a report about some men of the past, which the reader or listener finds objectionable or worthy of censure because he can see no aspect of truth nor any factual substance therein, let him know that this is not to be attributed to us but to those who transmitted it to us and we have merely passed this on as it has been passed on to us. See also, demolition of al-Azza, demolition of al-Lat, demolition of Manat, criticism of the Quran, Allah as moon god, Sirat Rasul Allah, one name for any traditional Muslim prophetic biography of the Prophet Muhammad, list of religious hoaxes. Notes. References, Fazlur Rahman, Major Themes in the Quran, Bibliotheca Islamica, ISBN 0-88297-051-8, John Burton, Those Are the High-Flying Cranes, Journal of Semitic Studies 15, 246-264, doi, 10.109315.2.246. Yuri Rubin, The Eye of the Beholder, The Life of Muhammad as Viewed by the Early Muslims, A Textual Analysis, The Darwin Press, Incorporated, ISBN 0-87850-110-X, gr. Horting, The Idea of Idolatry and the Emergence of Islam, From Polemic to History, Cambridge University Press, ISBN 0-520-65165-4. Nasser al-Dar N. al-Bana, NASB al-Majan RQ li Nazfi Kaishot al-Garan RQ. External links. Commentators Those Are the High-Flying Claims. The Satanic Verses story was never taken seriously by Islamic scholars. Muhammad, the Man and the Message, Story of the Cranes or Satanic Verses.